She was nobody. That was the first and most important thing about her. She had learned to be nobody the way other children learned to walk, early, out of necessity, because the alternative was falling. On dust, where the chemical storms ate exposed skin and the water shipments arrived less frequently each year, nobody was the safest thing you could be. Serethi Voss was 26 years old, and she had never once been safe. But she had been nobody, and that had kept her alive. Murren Duskwell died on a Tuesday. The Ash Singers do not call it Tuesday, they call it the day the relay moved, but Serethi had kept a private count since childhood. Murren's throat had been going for months, the mineral paste no longer enough to hold the voice together, and in the end she had one night of whispered speech remaining, and she spent it on coordinates. Not on love, not on apology, not on the name of the bloodline she had spent 40 years hiding. On coordinates. Serethi held the old woman's weathered hands with their mineral paste-darkened creases and listened, and when Murren stopped whispering, she was already gone. Serethi sold the last of her scavenged progenitor components to buy passage on a cargo hauler, wrapped her boots in fresh salvage cable, and left dust without looking back. She told herself she was following a dead woman's last instruction. She did not yet understand that she was following a 40-year plan. The rust-orange surface receded through the hauler's scratched viewport, dome clusters shrinking to blisters, then to nothing. And for the first time in her life, Serethi Voss was somewhere other than the world that had been trying to kill her since she was born. Dr. Iolan Mars looked at Serethi across two scan tables with washed-out hazel eyes behind augmented diagnostic lenses and said very quietly that the genome she was reading should not exist. The Solabri markers were not supposed to be anywhere in the living population. House Solabri had been destroyed in the War of Nine Suns 1,200 years ago, its bloodline erased from official record. Serethi sat on the scan table in her patched envirosuit and said nothing. Iolan said the name of the destroyed house aloud, the first time Serethi had ever heard it, and the word landed in the clinic's clean white air like a stone dropped into still water. Then Iolan said, "You need to run." And then, "The galaxy already knows you are here." She ran first. She is not ashamed of that. Running was the correct response to the information available, and Serethi Voss had survived 26 years on a death world by responding correctly to available information. She ran to Phelan, the bone-white salt-flat death world where old Senna held court in the central dome, surrounded by 11 data chip necklaces, and the memory of every civilization the Ash Singers had committed to keep. The dome's amber-lit interior smelled of mineral paste vapor and old woven fabric, and the tapestries on the curved walls recorded, in pictographic shorthand, the names of everyone the galaxy had tried to erase. Old Senna received her in the amber-lit interior and sang the relay that had been passing from singer to singer for a century. Progenitor phrases encoded into lullabies, preserved in the mineral paste resonance of 100 throats, finally arriving at the ears they were encoded to find. Serethi recognized the phrases before she understood them. Something in her body knew the language before her mind did. And then old Senna's voice broke, the mineral paste finally failing, and the old woman's hands, which had been perfectly still while she sang, began to tremble again, and the relay ended 3 phrases from completion. Old Senna wept without knowing she was weeping. Kale Thyros found her on Phelan. He came in civilian merchant clothes that were always slightly too well tailored for the stations he frequented, his matte black prosthetic left hand resting at his side, the thin surgical scar running from his right temple to behind his ear, catching the dome's amber light. He said his father had sent him. Then he said his father was dying. Then he said he did not know which of those facts to trust, and that was perhaps the most honest thing anyone had said to Serethi in years. She let him stay. Outside, a chemical storm wall was rolling across the salt flat, rust-orange and sulfur-yellow particulate 3 kilometers high, lit from within by static discharge. And there was nowhere to go until it passed. They were still on Phelan when Lord Thyros fired the drift cannons. The habitable moon in the Velarys Nebula had 60,000 people on it. Farmers, mechanics, children born in the navigable corridor between house territories, forgotten by the powers that charted the nebula centuries ago. Lord Thyros fired the drift cannons as a demonstration of capability, a message written in the deaths of 60,000 people. The violet clouds of the Velarys Nebula went white-hot at the point of impact. Where the moon had been, a spreading field of superheated debris expanded outward, turning the gas clouds pale grey in a sphere 300 kilometers across. The Quiet Edict had held for 800 years. It did not hold for 801. Serethi felt it. The binding scars at the base of her skull flared hot and white, and she pressed her hand to the back of her neck and understood, for the first time, with the full weight of the understanding, that the power moving through her body was not separate from the weapons that had just killed 60,000 people. It was the same network, the same signal, and it was waking up. The faint luminous veins she had noticed weeks ago, spreading from the base of her skull, were brighter now. Kyle watched her from across the dome and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The galaxy had just announced what it intended to do with her. Empress Regent Lysara Aethonis received the intelligence in her chamber atop the throne spire, standing at the head of her long conference table with the regent's mantle catching light from the floor-to-ceiling viewport panels. The luminous star map threads in her white carbon weave shifted in real time, and a new patch near her left shoulder went dark. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she gave the order to commit the fleet. She did not know yet that she was also committing herself to the end of her regency. She only knew that 60,000 people were gone and someone had to answer for it. Archon Phelan had been in the sunken archive for 11 days when the drift cannon fired. He felt it as a change in the archive's pulse. The blue-white light in the walls brightening by a fraction. The geometric object at the chamber's center resolving briefly into a stable shape before fragmenting again. He was kneeling before the Codex translation interface, his long ink-stained fingers moving across the shifting Progenitor script, and he understood what the brightening meant. Somewhere, a bound conduit had been activated by proximity to a weapon discharge. The network was responding. The return protocol was accelerating. He had perhaps weeks to complete the translation before the sequence became irreversible. He worked faster. Serethi and Kale reached the Velarys Nebula in a battered cargo shuttle, flying through the navigable corridor between the violet gas clouds with the silent choir's encrypted formation data feeding through Kale's jury-rigged terminal. Vex Karen had been feeding Kale intelligence from inside House Thyros' military apparatus for months. Her shaved scalp with its interlocking circles glyph bent over her communications terminal, pale green eyes scanning ciphertext, sidearm at the small of her back. She fed them the drift cannon's access corridor coordinates. She did not tell them what they would find inside. She may not have known. The drift cannon structure was a Progenitor megastructure buried in the nebula's densest gas cloud, its exterior dark alloy etched with script that flared to life as Serethi approached. The corridor inside responded to her footsteps with faint floor illumination, a trail of light marking her passage through the dark. At the control core, the crystalline interface panel rose from the floor, and the binding scars on Serethi's neck blazed white. She pressed her hands to the panel, and the weapon's firing protocols spread across her vision like a language being spoken in her own blood. She could fire it again. She could fire all of them. She pulled her hands back. She did not fire, but the network had registered her. The return protocol accelerated. Lord Thyros was in a holding cell aboard a military transport bound for Ethan Prime when his implant began to change. The amber glow bled toward white. The hull panels around him showed faint luminous veins, the ship's progenitor-derived systems responding to his presence. He called for Kyle through the network itself, and Kyle heard it in the shuttle's instruments and changed course. In the holding cell, Lord Thyros told his son 2 things. In the time his voice remained his own. He told him where the seed was buried, and he told him the truth about the severed hand, that the surgery had been a mercy, a traitor's mark to make the silent choir classify Kale as dead rather than hunted. Whether mercy or self-justification, the old man said, he had never been certain. Then the implant went from amber to white, and the voice that came out of Lord Thyros's throat was not his. Kale left the cell. He did not look back. He had his father's confession and his father's coordinates and a blade he would bury in the soil of dust when this was over. Behind the sealed door, the voice that was no longer Lord Thyros's spoke in a harmonic register no human throat should produce. The architect, the distributed progenitor consciousness, completing its occupation of a skull it had been slowly integrating for decades. The man and the signal had shared a skull long enough. Now only the signal remained, and through every progenitor-threaded system on the transport, through the ship's drives and its irrigation feeds and its emergency lighting, the signal broadcast a single message. The conduit has been found. The return protocol is active. Come to the Cradle. Phelan completed the translation on the 13th day. He sent the document to Serethi through 3 encrypted relays, each one routed through a different Dead World communications node. The document contained the kill switch phrase, the severance command encoded by the last progenitor as dissent against their own species' resurrection, a door and the key to lock it. Phelan had spent 30 years learning a dead language for this. He sat back on his heels in the archive's alien light, and his ink-stained fingers finally went still. Eolan was beside Serethi in the shuttle cabin, augmented diagnostic lenses flickering through spectra, reading the binding's progression in Serethi's neural architecture. She said, "The scars are overwriting your baseline cognition." She said, "If the return protocol completes, there will not be enough of you left to make a choice." She said, "I can give you a timeline, but I cannot give you more time than the timeline allows." Serethi looked at the kill switch phrase on Phelan's document, a sequence of progenitor syllables transliterated into a script she could read, and she asked how long. Eolan told her. It was not long. The Cradle was a dark sphere the size of a small moon, suspended motionless between 2 brown dwarf stars in deep space beyond any charted system. When Serethi's ship approached, its surface began separating along geometric fault lines, each section rotating and extending outward like petals of a flower designed by a mathematician's nightmare. The interior blazed blue-white through the gaps. Kyle stood at the viewport and said nothing. Eolan ran her diagnostics in silence. Serethi watched the Cradle unfold and felt the binding scars spread from her neck to her shoulders, blazing, and understood that the structure was responding to her the way the corridor had responded to her footsteps, with recognition, with welcome, with the certainty that she was the door it had been waiting 8,000 years to open. The architect manifested in the Cradle's central chamber as cascading progenitor script that took vaguely humanoid shape, its form shifting between geometric configurations too precise to be random and too alien to be comforting. It spoke to Serethi in the language Phelan had spent 30 years learning, and she understood it, not because she had studied, but because the binding had made the language her body's own. The architect said, "You are the completion." It said, "The return protocol requires only your consent." It said, "You will not be destroyed. You will be expanded." It said these things in a voice like architecture, like mathematics, like the sound a civilization makes when it decides it deserves to survive. Serethi listened to all of it. She stood in the cradle's central chamber with the binding scars blazing across her neck and shoulders, and she listened to the architect's voice like architecture. And she thought about 60,000 people and a moon that was not there anymore. She thought about Maren's hands in the dark, spending the last night of speech on coordinates instead of love. She thought about 12,000 people in the warrens of dust who did not know they were living on the corpse of a world that could be reborn. And then she said the kill switch phrase. She said it in the Progenitor language, at the precise harmonic frequency Phelan's document specified, and the binding scars on her neck and shoulders blazed white and then went dark. Not dimmed, dark, burned out. The geometric script figure in the chamber's center fragmented, its configurations collapsing, the cascading language breaking apart into dormant code. The cradle's blue-white interior light flickered and steadied at a lower level, still on but no longer speaking. The network severed. Across the galaxy, Progenitor systems continued functioning, but the coordination signal was gone. They were autonomous now. They were mortal now. They would fail, eventually, without the network's maintenance. The galaxy's infrastructure had a lifespan for the first time in 8,000 years. Serethi stood in the cradle's silence with burned-out binding scars and no power left in her hands. Lysara Aethonis had won the fleet battle in the Velarys Nebula without Progenitor weapons, positioning and attrition, the old tools, the ones that required competence rather than inheritance. She stood in the Regent's chamber afterward, with the mantle's luminous threads showing 3 dark patches and 1 new one, and she reached up and unclipped the mantle from her shoulders and set it on the conference table. She was no longer regent in any legal sense. The legal basis had been dissolving for months. She looked at the mantle for a moment, at the star map that had been updating in real time, territories gained and lost. And then she walked to the viewport and stood in the light of the capital city radiating outward below, and asked herself what came next. On dust, the surface above the seed showed its hexagonal fracture pattern to a sky the color of rust. Kyle buried his father in the metallite soil at the center of the glyph, wrapped in ship hull fabric, the way the death worlds bury their dead when there is no other material. He placed the blade in the grave beside him. Then he stood up and pressed his prosthetic matte black hand flat against the ground, and felt, through the exposed joint mechanisms, the faint pulse of the seed's dormant systems responding to the progenitor thread in his father's implant, still active in death. The seed was not a weapon of destruction. It was a terraforming engine. Dust could breathe again, not today, not soon. But the mechanism was there. Serethi stood at the edge of the hexagonal fracture pattern and looked at the rust-orange wasteland that had been her entire world for 26 years. The binding scars on her neck were dark and dead. She would never interface with progenitor technology again. She had no bloodline claim the galaxy would recognize, no throne waiting for her, no power left in her hands. She had the knowledge of what she had chosen and why. She had a world beneath her feet that was also a grave and also a seed. She had 12,000 people in the warrens below who did not yet know that the planet they lived on was the corpse of something that could be reborn. She would have to tell them. That was the next correct response to available information. Across the galaxy, progenitor systems continued functioning, but the coordination signal was gone. Starfall drives ran on momentum. Irrigation canals on Jessad still pulsed their faint blue-white glyphs at night, but they could no longer self-repair. Habitat domes maintained pressure but could not adapt. The throne spire still rose from Ethan Prime into low orbit, its script still glowing faintly blue, but fading slowly, the way a voice fades when no one is left to answer it. The galaxy's infrastructure had a lifespan for the first time in 8,000 years. Everything the houses had built their power on was now mortal. And mortality, the chroniclers would write, was the beginning of accountability. Phelan spent the remaining decades of his life ensuring that there were chroniclers. His binding scars had faded after the severance, the gold circuitry in his robe hem still functional, still warm to the touch, but his own connection to the network burned clean. He taught 17 students the Progenitor language. He taught them not as a secret to be hoarded, but as a tool to be used. The way a surgeon teaches anatomy, with the understanding that knowledge kept in a single skull dies with the skull. Tessith Karen was the first of his students. She came to him with ink-stained hands and a leather-bound notation tablet covered in her own shorthand. And she did not tell him about the ledger, and he did not ask. Some things are repaired by work rather than confession. The chroniclers who came after recorded this moment as the end of the Age of Thrones. Not because a throne was destroyed, no throne was destroyed. The throne spire still rose. The age ended because a woman in a patched envirosuit with burned-out binding scars chose to walk toward 12,000 people with a truth in her hands instead of a weapon. The age ended because she made the choice in full knowledge of the cost. That is the only kind of choice that ends ages. The chroniclers wrote it down in the Progenitor language, which Phelan had taught to 17 students by the time he died, and in the Ashsinger shorthand, which had survived because the relay had been completed. 3 phrases short, but close enough, because Serethi had known the ending already in her body before her mind caught up. They wrote it in every language they had, because Marin Duskwell had spent 40 years teaching them that languages die when no one writes them down, and this was one story they were not willing to lose.